I'm coming on here today with some really hard news, some bad news for some people in the gun community. I want you to brace yourself before I say this because it's really going to hit some of you pretty hard. But the fact is, Glocks are never going to be collectible and they're never going to be valuable. Hey everybody, Yankee here. I have to come on here today, like I said, and say something that I didn't think I'd have to say, but apparently I do, because it seems like some people in the gun community might be morons, and they might be falling for all the hype right now. You know, there's a lot of channels telling you better go out and get your old Glocks now, because they're being discontinued. They're not going to make them anymore. You're not going to be able to get them. They're going to be valuable. They're going to be collectible, all this stuff. And a lot of people are falling for it. I'm seeing Glocks listed for $1,500 because people think they can get it from rubes. I've seen people buy 10 Glocks. We had someone in our chat the other day said they bought 10 G19 Gen 5s because they're going to be so valuable in a year. Well, that ain't going to happen. All you're going to have is 9 G19s that you got to find some sucker to buy at retail price, or you're going to take a drumming on it, because they are not going to become valuable. They are not going to become collectible. People don't seem to understand how things become collectible or valuable. Now, I'm not saying you can't collect Glocks. You could collect them all if you want to. They're like Pokemon. If you want every one of them, get every one of them. But you can also collect used Q-tips. That doesn't make them valuable or actually collectible. It's just something you're doing. To understand the collectible market, you have to realize two things. For the old Glocks to become collectible, you would have to not be able to get a new one that functions the same or looks the same. The new ones are going to function the same and look the same. They're only going to have a small, minor internal difference. All they got to do is make it to where that little wedge doesn't fit in between the connector and the actual foot on the firing pin, and they got to take off a little bit of the trigger bar to where it doesn't ride over it if it does slide in there. That's all they got to do. A lot of the aftermarket Glock triggers already don't have the extra piece on it, so it isn't going to be a big change. Not going to be one you notice. Glock has even said not going to affect how the gun functions, and definitely not going to affect how the gun looks. So you're still going to be able to get Glocks, period. So no one's going to say, well, I want the Gen 5 so much that I'm willing to pay, 3 times as much for it simply because there's a change in the new Glock that I can't even notice and don't know what it really is. That's not going to happen. There is no lack of ability to get new Glocks, and no one's going to say, oh, I can get the Gen V for $600, or I can go buy this Gen 5 from this guy because they don't make the Gen 5s anymore. It's just going to cost me 3 times as much. No one's going to do that. That would be ridiculous, because you're paying 3 times as much for something with a change or without the change that didn't make any difference. That's like saying, oh, my Mustang S650 is going to be so much more valuable now because as of next month, they're changing how they do a small piece in the steering linkage. It's not affecting anything or making anything really work different. It's just they got it from a different manufacturer and it's made slightly different. So now people aren't going to be able to get the ones with the old linkage in it anymore. No one's going to notice that or care. It isn't going to affect value at all. It isn't going to make that car more rare because it has a piece that you can't see that's slightly different. That doesn't affect function. That's not how it works. Another thing for things to be collectible is that they have to be scarce. Remember back when comic books were so valuable, and then the comic book industry caught on to that, and they started making 50 different variants of everything and producing 10 times more than they could sell just to make sure they got everybody buying everything? Well, that killed the market completely because scarcity went away. And it even affected things that were still scarce, stuff that had made before that. I had books that went from being worth like $2,500 to $300. I had one book that was worth like $6,000. It went down to $1,500. Simply because they had destroyed the market. People weren't interested in investing in it anymore because it wasn't scarce and it wasn't valuable. So they lost interest in the old stuff too. So it hurt the market entirely. That's the way it's going to be with Glocks. There's no scarcity of Glocks. Right now, if they never made another Glock, they probably still wouldn't really go up in price. You might be able to get MSRP for them because people are like, oh, you can't get them anymore. But there's other guns they can get. Why would they pay $1,500 for a Glock when they can pay $7 and get a Walther PDP, which is probably a better gun? Just the fact that it's not available anymore isn't enough. It had to be scarce. It had to be like, well, there's only this many G19s and it's a small number and it's a symbol to have one. It shows you have something that most people don't have. That's not going to be the case with Glocks. There's enough on the market right now that if it never made another one, there's enough for everybody. So they're not going to go up in value. They are not collectible. They are not rare. They are not changing to where you're totally different now, so you can't get this anymore. No, and you can also, like I said, get the same thing from other manufacturers. So none of the conditions exist for Glocks to go up in value. Period. You might be able to get retail back for them eventually. But that's it. Because whether you use it or not, still a used gun, as far as anybody buying it from you is concerned. So, not going to happen. Stop listening to these channels that are telling you, you better go out and buy them. You better go out and buy them. That's because they're trying to maintain that gun manufacturing bubble that we live in right now, where buying is so artificially inflated through fear and manipulation that they'll never be able to maintain that, and they know it, so they're doing everything they can to try to. That's all that is. That's a bunch of talking heads on the internet trying to convince you to go out there and maintain that bubble, keep that money flowing, so they can have all the money they need and, manipulate politics and everything else. And so they can line their pockets. That's all that is. The change to Glocks is going to be minimal. You're not even going to notice it. Looking at it, you're definitely not going to notice it. Shooting it, you probably won't notice it. You'll only notice it if you're someone who's interested enough to take your guns apart and look at them inside. And you'll be like, oh, that's slightly different. Works the same. So not going to be collectible. Not going to go up in value. Quit listening to the salesmen and the hype men on it, because they're lying to you to get your money and to, like I said, maintain that artificial bubble. So just keep it in your head. You're still going to be able to get Glocks. They're still going to work the same. They're going to be a different generation. How hard is it to find Gen 2s right now? They ain't worth 10 times what they originally sold for. And they're more scarce than Gen 3s, Gen 4s, Gen 5s. So, like I said, value isn't going to go up. Collectability isn't going to go up. Not much is going to change. And if you fall for that, well, then you might be a moron. Please, please hit that like button and share this video on whatever social media you have. Since this is a restricted channel, you're the only chance we have to overcome YouTube's anti-2A bias and discrimination.